Okay, so wanted to talk about a whole bunch of lock things, and that came about from this whole Vosteed, Valkyrie, and some raccoons, or as well, are associated with it. With some people thinking that the lock is an absolute joke because it can become disengaged if you're doing some spine whacking or other impact kind of testing on there. And I just kind of wanted to talk about, well, a whole bunch of locks. But yeah, I think I said on the end of this, the original review video for this guy, button locks are fun. They're a fidget knife dream. But as far as kind of my experience with them, they're kind of temperamental. And I really find them to be much less reliable than many other different lock interfaces. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. For one, these guys, if a company does opt to use a little bit softer steel in the actual lock interface there, that can make it a little bit easier for doing some impact testing to have the lock fail on you. But yes, we also have problem that I had showed recently that especially with these liner based ones, this is the Kaiser Towser K button lock, um, can have the problem of the button jamming, and this I've had a problem now on these Kaisers, but I first saw it with some Sen cuts. And yeah, it's reached a whole bunch of knives. It has not affected my Vosteeds yet, or this Trevisa or anything like that, but something that can and will happen. And I think it's kind of a change in weather and or barometric pressure or something like that that can slightly warp the liners here because they possibly have just a little tiny bit of tension in there. More often than not, when this ends up happening to me on a knife, if I loosen and retighten the body screws on there, everything just kind of resets and it's fine. However, out in the field, you're generally not going to have that unless you're actively carrying around a bit set with a T6 and T8 sort of thing. So that's absolutely terrible and drives me crazy. And one of the reasons why I'm not super interested in picking up a whole bunch of other button lock knives that use standard steel liners. What I haven't seen any of them do is any of something like this. The Cormorant here and then the full titanium. This doesn't have steel thin liners on the inside. The interface material on both sides of this is just a straight up thicker titanium. Also, the CJRB Pyrite, the full steel version that doesn't have steel liners on it, also haven't had that problem. And then a whole bunch of them that, I don't know, like Tucson has come out with quite a few button locks. Most of them don't end up having that problem, but because they're, like this guy, titanium bodied knives rather than having some thinner steel liners. That's just kind of my assumption. I can't really tell that exactly for sure, but I can say it's happened to basically every different manufacturer's button locks that I've seen that end up making them a little bit more on the affordable side there. So in that way, hell, I don't trust them in general for long term crazy durability and or reliability because of that, but also because the way that they end up working. Sure, I'll go ahead and pull this guy out, a little Kaiser sway back here. You see that thicker part of that plunger cup or whatever you want to call it. That's what actually interfaces with the blade and has that locking sort of thing going on there. Then you can see it gets thinner there, and that happens basically on all of them. For Kaiser and Sencut Civivi and Trevisa and Tucson and everybody else, that's kind of just the way that that's done. ProTech as well. So that little part there is a bit weaker, and it also only interfaces with half of the blade there. So in some ways, it's kind of a half version of an access lock or something like that. But you can also have the spring have trouble with it. You can obviously have the lock jamming issues that I talked about, and it's a little bit easier for these guys, spine whacking wise or other impact testing, to end up having some problems there. And depending on who's actually manufactured them and or the particular implementation of the lock, you can or sometimes don't have the locking pins or the stop pins there. Like this sway back, it has it on the open position. On the close though, it uses the actual lock. So anytime that actually closes, that causes impact on that lock interface. So something that can end up just putting undue stress on it, which is why some manufacturers like these guys made them just a little bit softer so they could absorb some of that just a little bit better. Anyway, I do need to move this guy out of the way. Let's put all of my, well, that's a bad idea because I already have some other manufacturer's items in this little yeah, magnetic tray here. So yeah, I'll just move them over to the side here. So those are some button locks, and something that can also make things a little bit less reliable, which tons of companies have basically done for a hell of a long time here. There we go. There's the Kershaw Launch 15, or sorry, not the 15. This is the Launch 6, right? Shit, I don't know. Launch 6 or 11 or whatever the hell. Anyway, almost all of the Kershaw guys do this, but plenty of other manufacturers do that with switchblades too. They make them out of aluminum. And aluminum is much more malleable even than softer steel or something like that. And in this particular case, it does have a stop pin, but it is just mounted there in that aluminum. That will end up, especially from the power of the springs in there, will end up kind of pushing that and working itself loose over time. And there's just not really anything you can end up doing with that unless you actually wanted to make a switchblade out of either steel or titanium or, I don't know, zirconium or any of those other really kind of fancy different materials or whatever. It's just something that's kind of inherent with it, but tons of companies end up doing them like this. Like Boker, this is the Lundquist alluvial that just recently come out. I've been too lazy to actually put it all back together quite yet, since I was trying to tune it up a little bit. But yeah, so that all their Kalashnikovs and other switchblade sort of things do that, and plenty of others do as well. Some from ProTech and well, I would say Microtech, but they generally don't do switchblades. I think they've done a model or two in the past, but it's certainly not what they're known for. They're much more known for their out the fronts. Speaking of out the fronts, here we go. This one's super tiny. It's another Boker, but yeah, these guys can have some problems here of kind of getting off track. This can happen if something was blocking it from getting all the way out or whatever. But this can also happen if they are in the fully out position and you stab it into something and wiggle it around, or you're trying to pull it back out or whatever. That can cause that kind of off the track sort of thing. So these guys, even though they generally look super wicked, maybe not the best knives to actually use for I don't know, self-defense pokey kind of situations. So they're not incredibly reliable. Some of them can be a little bit more than others, but it is kind of just inherently a problem with out the fronts in general. So there you go with that. Let's see. Well, that's another button lock. I was talking about it earlier, the Trevisa. This one is actually interesting in that they did actually design a stop pin that both acts as the front and the back stop. So it does pull a little bit of impact off of the actual lock plunger sort of thing. But still, a lot of that sort of same kind of things can apply there. Let's see. Sure, we can talk about these guys that have been around for a very, very long time. Liner locks. In this particular case, it's the Pelora from Migron. That's the word. And man, this is an absolutely phenomenal knife. Just looks like a crazy box, kind of in between a banter and a big banter from We/Civivi. But yeah, this thing is just absolutely phenomenal. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about liner locks here. And liner locks, essentially, you have some sort of a stop pin in there. There we go. This is a little bit more difficult to see than some of the others due to the coating on the liners and everything like that. But you have that stop pin that stops it at the that travel there, and we also have the lock interface here. And obviously, this is going to be thinner than some other kind of locks in general. But a lot of what can fail on these guys is there is kind of a delicate balance going on the interface here. If it's a little bit too polished or something like that, then when you put lateral force down on the knife blade, you can start to feel something known as lock rock, where basically putting any pressure there is putting that pressure onto the little lock bar, and since it's too polished or whatever, it will slowly start moving a little bit further that way because something's got to give, and it doesn't have enough friction to keep it where it needs to be there because these liner locks are not absolutely perpendicular. They are off a little bit. That way, as things settle over the years and things wear down a little bit, they can move over. And you also, when I said earlier with it being kind of a delicate balance, if you have too much friction going on in here, then you end up with lock stick, and you can't physically push the liner out of the way. So it needs to be a little bit kind of in that middle ground, but friction is definitely not working necessarily in your favor on these guys in particular. And if you do have a knife that ends up developing some lock rock, you kind of want to deal with it because it's only going to get worse over time. And it's not super difficult to end up dealing with that. You do have to kind of rough up the polished surface or whatever. Obviously, not too much. You want to use a fairly mid to high grit on a stone or sandpaper or whatever you're using for that to be able to kind of give you that friction back there. But yeah, it can start out a little annoying with some lock rock until, oops, it does actually fail just from you putting pressure on the top of the blade there. Definitely not something you want to ever really experience, especially if you're using something in the moment. But there you go. And these are a modification and or cheapification of the OG, which a lot of people call a frame lock these days. It was originally called the Chris Reeve Integral Lock, but yeah, it's a frame lock. This one in particular I chose as kind of the worst example, unfortunately. This is the Case Marilla. It also applies to the Kinzwa that they made as well. They did a fantastic job on the heat treat on these blades. It's unfortunately that they're as thick as an axe, so they really don't have very good cutting geometry. And the handles are just straight up made out of aluminum, just like most of these switchblade kind of things here. And that's going to be less strength than even these kind of liner steel liners here. And because of that, you need a lock bar relief. So that's going to be a lot of your failure mode in this particular situation here. That will probably let go if you don't have any kind of friction problems going on up there. So these guys are interesting. They're kind of light, but yeah, really only for light duty use. I think there's probably a reason why a whole lot of manufacturers don't use aluminum when they're manufacturing frame locks. Just I guess maybe a little bit of common sense that didn't quite rub off on Case on these things. I do hope that they do continue to improve upon some of these modern designs, because there's a lot of things about them that are really, really nice. They have crazy good action on them. They did a fantastic job on the heat treat of the S35VN, like I was saying. And some of the ergonomics on them are pretty darn good, but yeah, these things in particular just worry me in the long term. So definitely not, the absolute most reliable. But there we go. We can pull out just a standard frame lock. In this particular case, this is the what is this? This is the TAC-Raid DT03, manufactured from NOC knives. But this is a titanium frame lock here. It has hardened steel insert that also the aluminum ones do. If you are making a steel frame lock, Civivi's done some of those, and Kershaw has definitely been known to do quite a few of them. You generally don't need that. But yeah, these things are a little bit more reliable, but you still are dealing with some of those friction things. So something that is definitely something you should keep in mind with these things in particular, that if you do notice that you are getting lock rock, and you can tell that basically when the knife is in the open position, when you put force down on the top, you can actually see or feel the lock bar pushing a little bit further that way. Yeah, something that's definitely not super good, but it is what it is, and it's fairly strong for what it is. Still, that weakest link outside of the friction is going to be the lock bar sort of thing. This one has 3 different milling positions rather than the full deep cutout that most of them end up doing. Either way, they're both structurally about the same. So yeah, there is that. Let's see, something that I did allude to earlier here. We got the crossbar lock. And this one has kind of some of its own kind of problems that have kind of come up over the years here. This one in particular is the bug out. Maybe it might be just a little bit thin. I'll go ahead and use the 940 just because it's a little bit easier to see in here. But essentially, we have a standard hardened bar, hardened steel bar. That's there. We got a couple of Omega springs, these little tiny springs that are shaped kind of like a lampshade attachment finial. No, the finial is the thing that screws on top. Oh, well, but you know what I'm talking about. It looks like the Omega symbol. And those kind of attach on the inside of the liners, and you can see them kind of laced in here on this side. Yeah, you can see it on both sides here. And these things can be very, very reliable, but they also have their own kind of set of concerns. First of which, what I've experienced is because these things, more often than not, are tip up, all of this sort of stuff is down in the bottom of your pocket. And if you get some lint kind of on top of this guy here, and it gets in between that kind of lock bar and that provides it really removes the friction from it and can cause the blade to basically not lock up at all. And I've definitely had that happen. But of course, I have carried one of these knives, probably a lot more than quite a few others. So that's something I've definitely experienced. A lot of people, I haven't luckily run into this, but have had those Omega springs fail. Where they essentially, one part attaches to the bar, one part attaches to the liner. If one of those fails or something like that, then It makes it much weaker, the force that's always pushing that bar forward, which means that it can be way down here on the end, which will give you blade play, and overall, that can lead to the lock closing on you because it wasn't fully engaged, because it didn't have enough force pushing it forward there for you. And also, something that can happen with some manufacturers, since this is a little bit newer design, um, these little flats that it ends up sticking into should have a little tiny bit of a gradient going on there. And some companies haven't done that, and they make it just absolutely straight, which can make it a little bit easier for friction overall to kind of force that closed, which is something I've seen on a couple of like Gonzos or something like that. Obviously not something you're really worried about spending the huge dollars on, but something that these kind of locks do take just a little bit more finesse than some of those original companies who were looking to rip them off probably fully put in there. But I mean, overall, these things are fairly darn reliable when they're actually open. Um, and as long as those Omega springs are pushing that crossbar forward, what would actually take to have this thing fail is basically the handles and those steel liners in there to structurally fail or catastrophically fail for them to kind of fold up on you. Which in this particular case, these are some liners and some aluminum, so maybe not the absolute beefiest implementation of them ever seen by man, but still, they've worked quite well since McHenry and Williams kind of designed them, and Benchmade either licensed or purchased the whole lock design for them. Let's see. I want to bounce back to a little bit of a liner sort of thing here. We have this guy in particular. This is Spyderco Shaman. And their particular version of a liner lock, which is a compression lock. Very similar to a standard liner lock, but it's up top. That does keep your fingers out of the blade path when you're closing it, unless you actually have some of the few models that have the blade actually come up past that divot, in which case if you are trying to flick that closed, you really got to move your index finger out of the way, otherwise it'll bite you. Luckily though, the Shaman and the Paramilitary 2 don't have that feature, but yes, these are essentially a kind of a top loaded liners sort of situation, but because of the way that it ends up working, it has a very large stop pin up top there that the blade interfaces with, that allows the liner to swing out, and then it also has a notch on the other side of the blade where you can, you see that the that compression lock on the other side here, there we go, now that you can see it instead of me, that it has a little bit of a shelf on there. So it's a little bit more stable, but still, overall, it's only going to be as strong as the liners and all that sort of stuff are in these things in particular. I do think it's a little bit of an improvement over a liner lock, but still, for the most part, it hasn't really dazzled me into hoping that one day the rest of the industry will completely ditch liner locks and replace them with compression locks. But there we go. Let's see. So we can jump on from those to these guys right here. Standard back lock. This is a Spyderco Endura. But, another knife that's very, very well known that has a back lock is like the Buck 110. That good old folding hunter with the brass bolsters and all that sort of stuff. Now, these things basically have a lock spring, which is this whole large thing on the back here. And the end, which unfortunately is not super easy to see on these things unless you actually have one fully taken apart. And I don't want to do that because these things are a nightmare to try to put back together. you kind of have a little wedge sort of thing. Let's see. I can probably try to draw a really crude thing. I am not an artist, but yeah, you basically have that kind of lock bar sort of thing, and then the interface thing for it has a kind of a key, so it dips down a little bit, and that sticks into a notch on the blade that we can see basically right here. I don't have a crazy good flashlight right in front of me, but yeah, you can see we have a little interface area for that. And that's so it kind of snaps back in there. Um, this thing, a lot like a slip joint, basically always has pressure on it, which is why it's fairly difficult to reassemble all that sort of stuff. But works out all right. However, it is fairly easy for these things to end up failing from doing some impact testing. It's just kind of inherent to the lock in general, because that can slowly force the spring out a little bit, and depending on if it has some slip to it or whatnot, it can disengage on you a little bit. But for the most part, still fairly strong, and really works quite well, especially if you're using the knife in the direction that a knife is supposed to be cutting with. So, yeah, I generally don't have a huge amount of complaints on it. However, if you do get some lint all up in there, which is very easy to do, especially if you do carry them in the tip up position, that can very easily cause that lock to never fully engage. And, at least it's easy to see when it's not. But, yeah, it is something that, like the access lock, like I was talking about a little bit earlier, something that can very easily happen to you. Fairly easy to deal with. You either dig it out with, I don't know, whatever you got on you, a little pokey thing, a little toothpick, whatever. But there you go. And then, of course, we got this guy here. This is a cheap one, but it's basically the only one that I end up having. This is the Cold Steel Tough Light. And this one actually has the triad lock on it that Andrew Demko kind of designed for the company here. And it takes kind of the concept of the whole lockback sort of situation there. But it also adds a kind of a stop pin / wedge sort of thing in there. Helps the lock wear in a little bit better over time. It can seat and then reseat a little bit more, just a little bit better. And it also does increase some of the lateral strength, for doing some of that kind of crazy spine whacking. If that's something that you're all sorts of into, it does help out with that quite a bit. But it is basically just a modified lock back there. Same sort of things apply where you can accidentally get just a little bit of lint in there. That can cause these things to never actually properly engage, which isn't failing, it just failed to engage. And so that can be a little bit of a problem. But, for a lot of these things, they're a little bit more antiquated lock types. Some people aren't quite as comfortable closing them, especially not single-handedly. Or you can do what Eric Glesser ends up doing and dropping the tang down on your finger until he plays around with a knife that wasn't designed by him or his dad and ends up slicing his finger. So yeah, these things are they're a little bit more antiquated. I still like them for some knives, especially like these guys, and I'm still kind of interested in picking up a Stretch 2 XL. They are, unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, about $100 more expensive than they really should be, for it basically having the construction of Delica / Endura, but they've replaced the FRN with G10. I don't know. Of course, the blade steel is better than VG10 on them. I think it's S30V for the standard ones, and then I think they made a special one in crew wear that's pushing almost $300, which I think is just astronomically no, because, well, they're made in the same Japanese factory. I don't even think they're the Taiwanese really fancy kind of factory that they've ended up doing stuff with. So yeah, that I don't know. That's completely neither here nor there for this particular video. But I do like lockbacks. But yeah, they are probably the least fidget friendly. Even though Spyderco's themselves can be quite fidget friendly if you're bored enough, I suppose. But yeah, there you go. I just wanted to talk about a whole bunch of different lock types. All of them have problems. If you are absolutely looking for an EDC knife that is not going to have any kind of lock failure sort of things, just get yourself a pocket fixed blade. They make a ton of them. This one in particular is the Kaiser Harpoon Mini. It's a Maverick Customs design. This one is in CPM 10V, which is some fantastic stuff for not a whole lot of money. And yeah, you don't really have any kind of a locking failure or anything like that. They are a little bit less convenient to carry, and you might look a little bit more like a serial killer if you end up fidgeting around with them rather than playing around with stuff with moving parts. But at the end of the day, they're going to be much more reliable than any of these locks. And pretty much as far as I'm concerned, all of these locks I treat as, like I said near the beginning of the video, they are assisting me in keeping the blade open, but I should already have the knife skills and the know-how to basically treat them all as a slip joint, with the fact that the knife could possibly fold at any particular moment. And, using a knife with all of that sort of information keeping in the back of your mind, you end up being much safer with knives overall. So, I don't know. There you go. Locks are neat, but under absolutely no circumstance would I ever really think that I could rely on any of them in a in a situation, unless I absolutely had to, life and death sort of thing. Which in that case, I already know that most likely I'm not going to make it, because let's face it, I'm not, a very good survival type of person. But that's a general other digression. Yeah, I don't know. Uh, yeah, having a hard time trying to get my thoughts together here at the end. But essentially, if I were to actually want to trust something in a do or die situation, it would have to be a pocket fixed blade over any kind of folder, because all these folders are neat and they're absolutely a ton of fun to play with and tweak and tune them up and all of that sort of stuff. All of them are made with moving parts, and moving parts fail. It's just the nature of the beast. Whether it's these guys or ball bearing fans or magnetic levitation fans or anything like that for computers, any kind of manufacturing equipment, they wear out over time. It's not an absolute given that something will have a flawless service run, whereas something without any of those moving parts, much less can go wrong. So there you go. Alrighty, those were kind of my thoughts. There's all the locks, and there's some I like more than others, but there's none of them that I actually trust with my life. They're an assistive technology, I think, not or a band-aid on a situation rather than an absolute solution. So that's kind of my thoughts on them. Alrighty. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your day, yo. And subscribe, please.